Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the General Committee on Public Policy's virtual fireside chat series, Road to the Midterms. I am Brother Dr. Leonard C. McKinnis II, and I have the pleasure of serving as General Chairman of the Committee on Public Policy. Let me acknowledge the General President of Alpha Phi Alpha, Brother Lucian J. Metellus, and our Board of Directors. So to all of our guests, thank you for joining us tonight. The number is growing. Continue to share this across your platforms, your family and friends, and all of those who are concerned about America at 250 and Black life in this country. We are incredibly excited about tonight's discussion. I want to thank my committee member, Brother Prentice Butler, who will serve as one of our co-moderators this evening. And we are also excited to have with us Brother Chuck Smoot, the District of Illinois historian and also a member of the Midwest Region Historical Commission, for joining this call as a co-moderator. Of all the discussions we've had this election cycle, tonight's discussion is one of the most important. We all have seen and witnessed American celebrations celebrating 250 years of this country. We do so, although with critical questions, with lots of thinking that must go into this, as we critique and understand what it means to exist in this space 250 years after our nation's founding, especially in the light of the historical atrocities that have oftentimes plagued Black existence. And so tonight's conversation, of course, is one that is generative, it is fruitful, but it is also deeply critical. And I am excited about the panelists who we are going to have on this stage tonight. So once again, on behalf of the General Committee on Public Policy, I am excited about this conversation this evening, and I want to acknowledge our General President for putting this committee together and giving us the charge that we have to bring these kind of discussions to the forefront. I want to take a point of personal privilege and welcome to stage Brother Prentice Butler, who has served on this committee since Brother Metellus organized and gave our committee this charge. He is also the chairman of the Committee on Social, Racial, and Economic Policy in the District of Illinois. I want to ask Brother Prentice Butler to briefly introduce himself, and then we'll move on to Brother Chuck Smoot. Brother Prentice, welcome this evening, good brother.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to America at 250, Black Politics and Democracy and the Road Ahead. It's a pleasure to see everyone tonight. We're having an engaging discussion that I'm sure will be interesting and substantive in nature, so I'm looking forward to the discussion. And once again, Brother McKinnis, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Brother Butler, thank you. Brother Smoot, you have now made it as co-moderator on the General Committee. So I see. Your moderating expertise is clearly being noticed. Welcome, Brother Smoot.
Thank you, Brother McKinnis, and thank you, Brother Butler. I'm honored to be here, and I'm really excited for this conversation, and I'm really interested to hopefully come up with some actionable issues that we can come up with to happen after the conclusion of this discussion that people can take and kind of work with. So I'm very, very, very excited about the conversation we're going to have tonight.
Well, thank you, Brother Smoot. And we're not going to belabor the time this evening. I do want to say one point before we welcome our panelists to the stage. As a reminder to the brothers and those who are engaged in this conversation tonight, in all of its history, Alpha Phi Alpha men, we have never shirked our responsibility of engaging public policy, of engaging the political sphere, and engaging the social and the economic spheres, especially as they impact the communities that we serve. We see this as not only a civic responsibility, a moral responsibility. And so tonight's conversation fits within that kind of understanding that we have a moral obligation to engage the most critical and pressing conversations that face our communities. And so with that, Brother Prentice, I'm going to welcome your panelists to the stage and let you proceed to make the introductions. So with that being said, let me bring our panelists up for their introductions this evening.
All right, Brother McKinnis, thank you so much. So I'll try to be brief. We have very special guests tonight. I'll start with Brother Dr. Chris Jones. Our first panelist is Brother Chris Jones, a scientist, educator, entrepreneur, and candidate for Congress representing Arkansas 2nd District. and graduate of Morehouse College with 3 degrees from MIT. Dr. Jones has devoted his career to innovation, community development, and expanding opportunity through public service. The next person we have up is Brother Dr. Frederick Harris, class of 1983, I believe, of political science at Columbia University, and one of the nation's foremost scholars of race, democracy, social movements, and African American politics. His scholarship has helped shape national conversation on Black political thought and democratic participation. Our next panelist is Beverly Leone, is the founder and CEO of Local Civics and co-chair of the People's 250th, a Forbes 30 under 30 honoree, former professional athlete, and nationally recognized civic innovator. She is helping prepare the next generation of civic leaders through technology and civic education. And last and certainly not least, we have Dr. Michelle Taylor, who is an assistant professor of Black Studies, author of Reclaiming Our Space, founder of Sankofa Summer School, and co-creator of podcast Black Girl Missing. Her work explores feminism, Black feminism, culture, and social justice. So thank you everyone for being here tonight. And I'm going to start with an icebreaker. In one sentence, what does America at 250 mean to you? And I would like to start with Dr. Harris to get your feedback. What does America at 250 mean to you?
A sentence or just a word?
One sentence.
It represents disappointment and disillusionment.
Thank you. Beverly.
For me, I'd say America at 250 represents an opportunity to challenge our young people to re-envision what the United States should mean.
Appreciate it. Next, Dr. Jones.
Yeah, for me, America at 250 represents dreams unfulfilled and potential unrealized on a foundation of phenomenal history.
All right, Dr. Taylor.
I'm going to borrow from our ancestor, Frederick Douglass. What to the Black woman is America 250? And I will leave it as a question because everything is questionable right now.
That's certainly the case. Now I have to do my due diligence and make sure I get this statement. The views, opinions, and statements expressed during this panel discussion are those of the individual panelists and do not necessarily reflect the official position, policies, or views of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, its general organization, or any of its chapters. Panelists have been invited to share their own expertise, experiences, and perspectives, and they alone are responsible for the content of their remarks. So now that I got the legalese out the way, let's go ahead and jump into the discussion. So this is the first question. I'll pose it to Dr. Harris. As America approaches or is celebrating its 250th anniversary, what does this milestone mean to you personally? And how do you reconcile the promise of American democracy with its incomplete delivery to Black citizens?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. From a personal standpoint, I'm old enough to have sat at the knee of elders who survived Jim Crow. And I heard their stories. I heard the atrocities that they discussed. I also heard stories of laughter and joy. But the stories they told me was always a reminder that freedom is not necessarily free. It has to be constantly fought for. And in many ways, I see this as a vicious cycle of American democracy. There are cycles of progression. There are cycles of retraction. And I think we're in a long circle, beginning a circle of retrogression in many ways. There is a person that you may be familiar with. His name is Rayford W. Logan. Very much an eminent historian, taught at Howard University, was a past president of this distinguished fraternity, and he talked about the nadir, this lowest point in American history after the collapse of Reconstruction. And he was writing during the 1960s, and he was saying how things seemed to be moving in the right direction when he wrote The Betrayal of the Negro in the 1950s. And of course, we saw the Civil Rights Movement. It is a reminder that the American promise is not linear, it's cyclical. And I think we have to be prepared for what's about to come. It's already here, but I see more gloom than hope, unfortunately.
Dr. Jones, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, well, so for me, this celebration of 250 is special and personal. I was born on the 200th anniversary of America, so this year I celebrate my 50th year on this planet. So I spent a lot of time reflecting about not only what America has gone through, but what I've gone through. And you know, I'll say for a nation, we are old enough to have scars. But for an idea, we are still extremely young. And as a scientist and engineer, I think that America, democracy itself, is really our greatest experiment. The flip side of that coin is it's not our greatest accomplishment. And this gets to what Dr. Harris was saying, and that there are a number of things that we have not gotten right. And to Dr. Taylor's point, they're outstanding questions. And this question of whether we can live up to our ideals. Because I don't think there's any question of whether we have, because we have not lived up to our ideals at all. But the question is, can we live up to our ideals? And I think, to me, that is a question that I have to grapple with in this 250. We have to grapple with in this 250. And to me, our answer to that question will determine where we will be when we celebrate our 300th anniversary.
And Dr. Taylor.
You know, it's interesting because I don't use we when I talk about America, right? And respectfully, like, I'm not saying that that's a problem. It's just my own positionality doesn't allow me to say we, because there was nothing in the founding of this country that factored me at the intersections of all of my identities into what it envisioned this country would be, right? And so when we look back over however many years, right? 250, 400, 158, you know, what we see is clear evidence that this country doesn't want us here, right? And yet we are here defiantly making this country better, making her people better, right? Just by virtue of being our amazing selves. And so what I think about at this 250 and what needs to be reconciled is appreciation and reconciliation and reparation. And, you know, you owe us. And I keep thinking about that. And I always think about, you know, the land that we're on, right? None of us were supposed to be here. What about the people that were already here that, you know, from whom this land was taken and all those things? I'm thinking more about how do we work in solidarity with our indigenous people to ensure that the stewardship of this land, whatever it ends up looking like, whether America exists in 50 years or not, I don't know, but ensuring that the people who are the stewards of this land, whose blood is in the soil of this land, are the ones who get to decide what it looks like going forward in the future. And so that's my radical vision for what should happen and kind of where I stand right now.
Thank you for that. And Beverly, what about yourself? What are your thoughts?
I think this moment in time, I'll sort of answer in two ways. One, just as a person that is alive in this moment in this world, and what it means to be in community with others that are alive in this moment, asking this question, answering this question. There's a space of needing to be present with each other, to affirm each other, and we are here. right? And I think there's a conversation that tries to ignore the fact that we are here. It is inconvenient that we are here, we exist, and we are actually a core part of this American democratic experiment. It's inconvenient for a lot of folks that we are here and we still have voices. We have historians, no matter how hard people try to erase that history. And so there's a part of me that's like, we're here, and it's important for me to affirm that, and for me to also allow others in our community to affirm that. The part that I think is important as well as we mark this sort of milestone as a nation is sharing the histories and the stories, no matter how inconvenient they are, to others, because I think there's a lot to be drawn from, and it isn't all it isn't all celebratory. And I think that's important, no matter how frequently folks try to ignore that. And I think part of what we experience as a nation is grappling with that pain and trying to ignore and move the discomfort. So I sit here saying, well, how do we make meaning of that? The other way I think about this is as a parent. I'm a new mom. So I have an 18-month at home, and I think about this shared history and the challenges and the pains and the scars of that history. And I also think about the responsibility and duty we all have in community to raise our children with this ability to envision the future. And so I sit with that tension, both as a student of history and someone that descended from people that experienced some of the most horrific things around slavery and the birth of this nation, and also as a mother that has to raise a child to their freest self.
Dr. Taylor, you said something a moment ago, and I just want to follow up. You said that this country doesn't want us here, but I think there's a second part to that is, but does this country need us as African Americans, as Black folks, Black men, Black women, to be here? And is there leverage? Is there something from your point of view? Is there leverage in acknowledging that aspect of not necessarily wanting us to be here, but needing us to be here to advance the cause of the country?
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody the disclaimer that you gave. I'm sorry, I wouldn't be the radical in the panel, right? Okay,
I'm not trying to get you to be radical.
Does America need us? Of course, America needs us. Do we have leverage? I say no, and here's why. And this is my challenge always to our people. I just watched two major primary days happen in the last few months, and I looked at the voter turnout, right? Average of about 20% across the nation with all these major elections that were going on. So I can sit with us talking about voter suppression and things like that, but we have to talk about voter apathy. Why did you not, in Atlanta, I'm looking at y'all. Why did y'all not vote this last election, right? So we understand that in a capitalist country, it's money, it's land, and that's where you get your power, right? And we know that that was linked to voting and things like that. So most of what we have is that vote. But with 45, 48 million of us, right? And however many of us can vote, we're not showing up to do that very simple thing that doesn't cost us a dime. And that's where a lot of the leverage is, especially on the local level. So when I think about things like that, we're fighting against the Electoral College, that's its own thing. But on the local level, where are we showing up? And so if I felt we had more leverage, and I guess it's a bit of me just kind of like, come on, y'all. Like, so much of that power is in a thing that we are not exercising, knowing that our forebears fought so hard for us to be able to do that. So I think about that. And then I also think about like our capitalist aspirations. Like, so many of us, unfortunately, are just looking out for ourselves. And as a people, we are supposed to be communal. We are supposed to be working in community with each other, not stepping on each other and pulling the ladder up after us. And I think if we focused more on that, then we could start to leverage things. Does the United States need us? It's always needed our labor. It's always needed our bodies. It's always stolen and extracted our culture to make itself feel better, because the United States has no cultural exports without us, right? But again, that goes back to making the money. How do we leverage this? We have to show up and become civically engaged. We have to do this work in our communities. I grew up with a father who's a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. My brother is as well. I know you brothers are doing what you need to do. I'm a member of National Coalition of 100 Black Women. We're doing what we need to do. But there's so many of us, who are not, right? And so, I'm looking at this comment. Yeah, like, yes, the social infrastructure of voting has been eroded. Yes, we can contend with that after we've actually shown up to do it.
Right.
So like, first we show up and do it. Then we talk about, well, it doesn't work, because we talk a lot about it not working. If 20% of us show up, then the argument falls. I mean, my stats folks, my professors, that doesn't really work, right? So there's a sense of accountability there. I think we could be stronger if we focused more on civic engagement.
Okay, well, and I mean, that's a beautiful segue into our next question that I want to direct to Brother Jones. When we look at how Black voter turnout traditionally impacts not only national elections, but state and local elections, it just seems to be there's a disconnect, because the priority on Black priorities, Black policy positions, often receive less attention, particularly after Election Day. So what is it that we can do, to close that gap and to hold our elected representatives and the parties in questions accountable? And I'm not just asking you this since you're the president candidate, but I still think it's a valid, it's a valid thing to examine.
It's a very valid thing to examine. And building on what Dr. Taylor said, I come from a state that was dead last in voter turnout. I ran for governor, and the voter turnout was not high at all. And I think, yes, voting is a part of it. What we don't understand in many respects is our own power. If we truly understood our power, then when we would know the minute we decide to show up and vote and show up with our money, then the folks in power will be determined by us. And then once they're in power, when we stay on them, they will make the decisions that benefit us. And I've seen it time and time again with a number of elected officials who they will show up to places where there's a collection of people that vote consistently at high rates. Doesn't cost you anything. They will also show up to places where there's a collection of people who have aggregated their dollar and said, our dollar will go to you if you do these things. You don't do them, it's all good. You're not getting my dollar. So what I impress upon all of us is to understand our own power, and that our power, the voting is one part of our power, but the larger arc of our power is staying engaged, staying connected, and staying. And I'm not even saying we have to be unified. There can be debate, dialogue, discussion, but I guarantee you at the local, state, and federal level, the places where there's a block of voters that are going to consistently show up, candidates and politicians will bow and bend to adhere to what they want.
Can I just add one more thing? Like, for a clear example of this, it's like you want to vote for somebody to do bring some resource to your community. They don't do it. You get your people to do it, right? That's the civic engagement that I'm talking about. It's like, we don't have to just wait for the elected officials to make things happen, or to give us money. As a collective, we raise our own money. We set up our own programs. We do those things. That's part of the civic engagement. And what I've noticed is a lot of apathy even in that, right?
Yeah.
And so, we need to return, in my opinion, we need to return to that, because we have hundreds of years of doing that, right? Like, that's how we made things happen in our communities. And so I would like to see that. I don't think we need to just rely on the voting or, that stuff. We actually just need to build stronger communities where we live and just make things happen. The kids are not getting a good enough education. Make a school, give them the education. These are the things I think we should be doing.
It's definitely both and. It's 100% both and. One thing I'll share on that though is that politics to me is the allocation of resources. Voting is choosing who you want to allocate certain resources. But to Dr. Taylor's point, we can allocate our resources outside of the electoral process. We can allocate our resources with the electoral process. I think we need to do both.
Can I jump in on this point? Because I think I want to shift the discussion on this a bit, because I think part of this discussion is an individualist discussion. It doesn't really look at the scope of political parties, which are partly responsible for mobilizing their constituency. It's sort of let elected officials off the hook as well, who are also responsible for organizing and informing their constituency. And so I think it's a reciprocal process. I think one of the most interesting and phenomenal things that have happened in the past few weeks is what the Social Democrats have done, right? They have sort of outflanked regular Democrats in places like New York. There have been mayoral win in Washington, D.C., congressional win in Philadelphia and other places, because party organizers went out to get people to come out and vote. So that's one point I want to make. The second point is that I think there's a lot of sort of criticism of Black voters for not coming out to vote, when you look at the socioeconomic positions of African Americans in the aggregate, they're more likely to come out and vote given that level of education. They come out in larger numbers than Asians, Latinos, and sometimes white voters. And traditionally, primary elections are low turnouts levels, mostly because incumbents are in power and people don't necessarily come out and vote for incumbents. So, because they want to see competition. Competition drives electoral participation. So I think there are a lot of structural, macro level factors that are important when we think about voter participation in particular. And the point about civic engagement, absolutely right. This is something that's been documented in the last 20 years. Americans in generally are less engaged in civic activism. Robert Putnam wrote a famous book called Bowling Alone. And basically, this has also contributed to fragmentation in American politics, because less likely people to come together in institutions and organization, both across race and class, which is also important, because that's another kind of concern of beef I have, is that the one constituency that's really left out of this discussion are poor and working class people. And they are the ones who are not really coming out to vote, but there may be a reason why. They're just not contacted, they're not mobilized by political parties and other sort of organizations to actually come out and get engaged.
So
one of the things I'd just love to add a dimension to this conversation that I think is an important through line, and thinking about why we may perceive apathy in voters. And part of that is the lack of practice we have in civic engagement, and this limitation to showing up to the voting booth. Maybe that's at local, state, and federal elections, but there's an expansiveness we are missing in civic engagement that I think, Dr. Taylor, you're speaking about. You don't need permission to create community and to actually innovate in community. And one of the conversations I actually see inside our education system at scale and this is across race and class and geography, is that young people are not challenged to think about ways that they can positively contribute to community in a way that is valued. And valued as in, that's not important for your future. You cannot make money from that. That's not a good decision to go into teaching. It's not a good decision to go into something that is cultivating community, because perhaps you should aspire to something that has a higher salary band. And I think this conversation actually hamstrings all of the communities across the US, every single community. And we are feeling that sense of isolation and disconnection at scale. And I think we are feeling, our young people are feeling what it feels like to not be affirmed and to have that valued. So when they're 18, and then after they're 18, they're 25, 30, they have families, they remember not being included in these conversations until they have assets, until they have capital, until they have resources that perhaps need to be protected. And I think that conversation is actually one we can shift with today. It's something that I spent most of my career working to sort of turn around. And so that starts both in our neighborhoods, it starts in our schools, but it's this conversation around what is valuable and who has value. Brother Jones, you were talking about how capital is politics as being this lever to allocate capital. And I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that if that is the only way we think about our politics or our participation in it, and I think a lot of folks may think about it that way, then we actually devalue all of these other important ways that civic engagement actually creates this thriving ecosystem. And I think it becomes much more challenging because it's perhaps much harder to scale in various communities because it requires real work and real people, that we sort of make the shortcut to say, well, where are the dollars and what are the seats we can fill? And it removes other people. We actually put people on the sideline instead of actually calling them into ways that they can contribute to that larger mission.
Well, let me clarify, because I'm glad you brought that up. I do want to clarify. My definition is politics is the allocation of resources, which includes capital and only. There are many different ways to allocate resources, but in our democratic republic, we use the lever of politics to determine where certain resources go. That's all I'm saying. And I think we have to understand that in that space, so that then we can say this is a space. The private sector capital markets is another way to allocate resources. So I agree with what you're saying. I just want, my definition is a bit more expansive. And then it's real quick, Dr. Harris, it's both and, right? There are structures that impact individuals. There are individuals and communities that impact structures. And I don't think that the presence of structures that are oppressive does not absolve you of your individual and collective responsibility to show up in a space in your own power. So I do think it's both and.
And I just want to say real quick, I agree with y'all. I was answering the question of, do we have the leverage? And the answer is no.
Right.
And this is a nation of 375 million people, and we're less than 50 million. I mean, numbers alone, okay, you know what I mean? I'm being a realist here, right? And that's why for me, when I look at it in those ways, yes, we can talk about, higher percentages of things like that. But overall, I think our power is really on that kind of community level and being like the change. And this is, I'm the social worker. I'm going to look at, retired social worker. I'm going to look at, this person's coming to me telling me they're hungry. Am I going to give them a sandwich right now, or going to tell them where they can go to sign up to get benefits? I'm going to feed the person right now while I work within the system to help get them long-term help. And I think that when you say both and, yes, let's do both. But we're not, in my opinion, we could be doing a lot more in the spaces that we occupy, whether we are elected officials, whether we're voting or not, to pool our resources as our ancestors have always done and show up for each other in those material ways and those meaningful ways that lead to that strengthen us for this larger fight, right? So I just want to make sure clear. I get everything that y'all saying. I'm with you. I don't like none of these parties, but I just feel like,
Right.
you asked me, do we have leverage? And my answer is no.
Yeah, I mean, all I'm saying is that all individuals are not the same. There are compounding effects that affect very poor people. A single woman with a kid in rural Louisiana whose polling place has been moved 10 miles from where it used to be, that has a huge structural impact. And these are not things that I'm making up. This is a result of the collapse of the Voting Rights Act.
Oh, I can tell you a number of stories right here.
Right. So to say that, so it's everyone's individual responsibility. The leap is much higher from some people than others.
But again, I said both and, right? Like I witnessed Arkansas change a voting location 2 days before an election, and then had to have a lawsuit to get it back. Like I've lived it, and we're living it now. So I don't disagree with the structural things. In fact, that's one of the reasons that I even decided to run for office, because I want to change some of the structural things. I'm just saying it doesn't absolve the community and the individual of their responsibility. Those of us in the community who have the discretionary time, resources, money, mental capacity should show up for those who don't have the discretionary time, money, resources, mental capacity. The young lady, and I have 3 girls. My life is busy, but I have more capacity than a single mom who has three daughters. And so I need to show up for my individual responsibility is to show up for my community in that way. That's all I'm just saying is both and.
That's why I mentioned Atlanta, PG County. I'm looking at y'all. I'm looking at all y'all that had access to your voting station 2 blocks down, and you walked right past it. Brother, I feel you. I am that single mom. I'm from the hood. You know what I mean? I get all of that. Those are the people I'm not talking to. I'm talking to those of us that absolutely have access, and there's nothing standing in our way. And only 2 out of 10 of us decide to cast that vote. That's what I'm talking about, you know.
Brother Butler.
So, Beverly, I have this question for you. And this kind of touches upon some of the things we've already discussed in the discussion so far. We often hear concerns about American democracy experiencing backsliding, democratic backsliding. What responsibilities do civic institutions have during this moment? What should they be doing to really impact change in this moment?
I think that's a great question in thinking about the ways that we can contribute that aren't just thinking what's happening in this election cycle, what's happening at the voting booth, how can we actually support folks. There's one track that's really important, and I think about it is in terms of like, you know, as an athlete, I'll think about it as an athlete, like what's happening this season. This season's coming up, we're in training, we got to get this done. But if you're actually thinking about building a winning program, you're building a winning culture, you have to be able to sustain and build a foundation that extends beyond your short-term season and plan multiple years, decades. We're talking about what happens in the next 50 years, in the next 250 years. And to your question about what is the role of civic institutions, and Dr. Harris is talking about Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. We've seen this huge decline of civic life and these third spaces or organizations that have supported the thriving communities in informal ways, formal and informal ways. And I think it is a call right now, and this is a lot of the work that we are doing at the People's 250, to call in our civic institutions that actually have the cultural capital, that have the social capital, that have the financial capital to be more innovative and be more entrepreneurial, to be more civic minded. And I think there is a gap that these civic institutions need to be a bit more courageous in filling, that addresses some of this sort of individualism we're seeing, right? Where we're even talking about how can people show up and be more responsible. I think we show up in community. And if you lack community, it is just another hurdle to show up. So I think one of the biggest opportunities we have is actually these civic institutions within cities, regional geographies, nationwide, to actually create these spaces, and not just around voting, not just around our electoral politics, but around culture, leisure, thriving, and tapping into what makes us feel most alive in community, right? And I think that is something that can bring families in, bring communities in, but also can redirect this conversation to remind people that, and explicitly help folks understand, yes, part of being in community also can be that participation can extend and should extend to our electoral politics. And I think that can be made more explicit, but you don't get there by just, really shaming people for not showing up. And I think there's a responsibility we have, but also I think folks need to be in community to be reminded of that responsibility. So I'm thinking as an educator right now, if you want to motivate and have young people get to their highest potential, they have to feel seen and loved and cared for before you can put that sort of burden and responsibility on their shoulders. And I think people step up to it, but without that sort of culture and care, it's really challenging. You're sort of challenging every individual to show up as an individual. And we actually need to show up in community.
So I'd like to ask a follow-up, because Beverly, you just said something that reminds me, I remember growing up, I have family in the South, and my grandparents would eviscerate their neighbors who didn't vote. They would talk about them like dirty dogs and what's wrong with you. And that's kind of how I came up with it. So while I understand what you meant about not shaming people, do you think there is a way where we can hold members of our community accountable to encourage them to vote and educate them without making them feel the way my grandmother made people feel when they didn't vote, which I don't necessarily think was helpful, but I just remember some of those conversations. So I'm wondering, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually love this question because I have a question right back to you.
Okay.
One of the things I wonder, so I'm curious about in hearing that, is your grandparents knew their neighbors.
Right.
Did they show up for your neighbors when they were in need? Did
Yes.
they share resources with them? Did they care for you, right? Did your neighbors know you? And so I think about this conversation about what it actually means to know and be known by your neighbors or your community. So then when you shame someone, you might not, you feel held.
Right.
And maybe shame isn't the right word. It might be, I feel guilty, or, you can love someone into saying, hey, can you show up better for me and us next time? To do that lacking community, I don't think has the intended effect that folks are aiming at, right? And I think we actually are experiencing that at scale, and that sort of this sort of singling out of folks. If we're not in community and someone says, well, you just didn't show up for me, it's very easy, I think, psychologically to sort of remove yourself from that equation. I think it's much harder when you have to do that and engage with your family, engage with your neighbors, engage with someone that's shown up for you outside of that space. So that's my question back to you, Brother Smoot. Did your grandparents know their neighbors like that?
I can answer it this way. There were 3 women on my grandmother's bike who had the right to spank me when I acted up. So, and that's how I grew up. But nevertheless, I do think there is, again, I'm looking at the and the yes and, because I guess I'm asking of what ways, and again, I don't necessarily advocate the way things happened 70 years ago with how my grandparents handled things, but there wasn't accountability and there wasn't encouragement. And I'm just asking, what ways can we advocate to bring back that level of encouragement, to bring back that level of community engagement, so that we are all equally invested in getting out at the very least, and not just voting, but the steps afterwards. But getting out and voting, that's the beginning step. And that's something that was a part of the fabric as we developed as a community. So I'm just looking at what ways can we do moving forward, and that's for anybody.
And I think that's why I focus more on what we do as a people with ourselves, because the voting is going to be the voting is going to be the voting. If they don't want our vote, they'll throw them out. They'll rig the system. They'll do whatever they want to do, right? And we're still facing that. We've been facing those kinds of things, right? From poll taxes and literacy, things and all of that. We've always faced challenges to that power of the vote. But I think the thing that we're missing is that, well, not missing, we get it. There's a generational thing, right? The elders are going to go vote. Right. That was one of the things with Mamdani. They were like, if you don't get out there to Queens and Brooklyn and talk to them older Black people, you know what I mean? Like, they're going to vote, right? The young people build community on their phones, which is, again, why some of the democratic socialists are a little more popular, is because they're actually immersing themselves in the younger folks community, which is online, right? My book is about, how we leverage social media, right? And so we are thinking a lot of times, we are thinking in a lot of our old school ways of doing things, which those often still work. Mailing things to people does still work, but we have to think about how we meet them where they are. And I think of Kwame Ture and two things that he said. One, you have to have an undying love of Black people. That's a struggle right now. I don't know if y'all realize that. A lot of our young people, that Black cultural consciousness is almost non-existent because of their immersion in social media and TikTok and all that, and their exposure to they have more exposure to white people than we ever had in our lives, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's this kind of, we're all together, and we're just, we're all in this same thing, and it like Black doesn't matter, I'm a whatever kind of thing. And the other part is we worked hard. I don't know if I have a Gen Z college kid, but like we worked so hard to make their lives better than what we had that there's not necessarily a same connection to that so-called struggle. And we did that because we didn't want them to have to struggle. But at the same time, they are not necessarily connecting to the urgency that maybe we and our parents and our grandparents experience. And then the other thing that he says is Black people need to be in organizations. And, I used to kind of be like, but no. Black people need to be in organizations. And wherever we can put ourselves, that's a community that we can leverage right there, right? These advocacy organizations we have, these social organizations we have, the fraternities, sororities, all of these things, NAACP, all of these things are all working on the lower level, but the young people may not always see it, right? And so we have a responsibility to make sure that they're exposed to that so they feel empowered. A lot of them think nobody's doing anything, nobody cares. But if we were better with our outreach and meeting them where they are and actually showing them what we're doing and then welcoming them into our organizations, right? Y'all know a lot of our organizations tend to be older. We got to get them there so they can see the power of organization and then begin to develop this undying love for Black people, because that becomes a motivator in everything that we do.
That was my follow-up question. Like, how do we change that? Especially see young Black men and others in our community say, you know what? I don't feel connected. So I appreciate that response. So thank you so much. Would anybody else like to add to that before we go on to the next part of our panel?
Yeah, again, I want the accountability to us to think about accountability in another way as well, because since 2007, every 4 years, Black voters are told to come out and vote as if your life depended on it. And for 8 years, they did that. In 1 year, they exceeded white turnout. And the question has become, particularly in the aftermath of Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, when there were promises put on the table about voting rights reform, about criminal justice reform in Congress, and it didn't happen, right? And the question becomes, particularly when there's not voter education or understanding of how the political system works, people are coming at, well, I did this, I came out, and my life hasn't gotten better. In fact, it may have gotten worse, right? But who's being held accountable for that? One of my favorite pieces of legislation that has not seen the day of light is actually H.R. 40. I don't know if many of you know that piece of legislation. It was introduced in 1989 by John Conyers. It was a bill to study reparations. Been introduced for 30 years. Even when Congressman Conyers was chair of the Judiciary Committee, it never went out for a vote. Hearings are being held, discussions are made, speeches are made, but with the increased empowerment of Black people in Congress, pieces of legislation that are critical to our community have not been produced. And the question becomes, why isn't that the case? And it might be meaning accountability. Sadly, may mean that people may feel apathetic in the sense that their vote just doesn't change things.
All right. Brother Smooth?
Yeah, so I'd like to throw out, we're we're looking at this quote unquote landmark year, 250 years of this country and our role, the role of African Americans in this country. And we know, I forgot who said it earlier, but I know that we're dealing with promises denied and information unfulfilled. But I guess what I'm looking at this point in our history, and when I say our history, I mean history of Black people in this country. What can we do? What ways? We've talked a little bit about voting and other things, but in what ways can we impact our collective communities to try to improve our stations and situations for our people to have a more productive experience in this country? Or is a more productive experience in this country for Black people even possible after 250 years? I'll throw that out to anybody, and I see a couple of y'all grinning and laughing, so
I'll say yes and no.
okay.
I'm sort of these days, I don't know if many of you are familiar with the work of the late legal theorist Derek Bell, who talked about how racism was permanent in American life, and that there are victories and there are valleys. And when the opportunities open, when there is a Supreme Court that's attuned to dealing with some of our issues, we need to jump on it. When there is a Congress where you have members, a majority, and these days it has to be a super majority, particularly in the Senate, to overcome a filibuster. By the way, it took over 100 years for there to be an anti-lynching legislation passed, which happened several years ago, even though it started at the turn of the 20th century, just to give context. When those opportunities are open and you have a friend in the White House, you need to get all you can out of it. Because when the wheels turn, when the cycle turns, as we see now, we're in dire straits. I think the other part here is pretty much what most everyone has said, is that Kwame Ture was absolutely right. Black people need to join organizations, build communities across class in particular, because I think that's a concern in our community that I don't think we don't talk enough about. Our churches are, I want to get in trouble on this panel. Theology is turning from, prosperity has a very individualist perspective. Some have questioned whether it builds community as opposed to liberation theology and the social gospel tradition. That's a fracture within our institutions that I think we need to think about. And we also need to retool some of our institutions, thinking of the young people. They don't see the sort of legacy institutions that we think are important or critical as much. They don't see it as important as we do. And getting on the other side of accountability, I forgot this point. many in our civil rights, in particular elected officials who have been there for decades, need to pass the torch to the younger people, because I think there's too much holding on. And so that's what I have to say on that.
I'll chime in, echo your passing the torch comment, and that doesn't mean leave, leave the stage. It means pass the torch. You still need to be there. There's a role to play. I think a couple things. One, to your question. So I ran an organization in Boston called the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. And one of the things that we did at DSNI was focused on both people and place-based strategies, right? Because you can focus on the individual and quote unquote lift them up, whatever that means. But if the place still doesn't allow them to thrive, you're only going to get ones and twos. You can focus on the place and quote unquote lift it up. But if it doesn't embrace the people, then they're going to get pushed out. And so I think we're in a moment now where it is both, again, the individuals, the community, and the institutions that we have to focus on. We just have to do difficult work. And there was a time when we would sit and watch the news together, or sit and watch a show. TV went off at a certain time. People went out in the summertime and played. We don't live in that world anymore. And so, to Dr. Taylor's point, we have to meet people where they are. For some, it is tell you about this community to come support. For others, it is I need some help. For some, it's reducing the barriers to entry to whatever, whether it's voting or starting a business or getting education. So we have to do the complicated work of meeting people where they are and of addressing it at both the individual and the collective and institutional level. And I just, to me, if we don't accept that there is no silver bullet, that there is no one way that's going to just all of a sudden rain down progress. And the last thing I'll say is that we should take a playbook from the folks who've been doing it. When big corporations all of a sudden had lawsuits that said, you can't market tobacco to kids, you can't pollute the air. Yeah, they were mad, but you know what they did? They went to the whiteboard and they scoped it out. And they said, all right, well, what's the strategic pathway? Well, we get the Supreme Court. And they spent 60 years working to get the Supreme Court. And when they got the Supreme Court, they got their decisions. So I think part of what our job is now is to, again, use our power to vote today, but also use our strategy and our power to map out a pathway for tomorrow. And I say that to say, again, Dr. Harris, I hear what you're saying about, the pendulum swings, when we got the Supreme Court. I get that. I think we have more agency. And I think our agency isn't in just being ready for what comes, but our agency is shaping what comes. And I say this as someone who's a seventh generation Arkansan. My folks were here before Arkansas was a territory. And I know what they went through. And I think about how do we utilize our agency to shape what will be here in the future so that the next generation can actually do something about it.
We have to teach them how to read. Number one, they can't read. That's a broad, hyperbolic statement. But come on, y'all. Okay, there's that. And when I go back to this idea of having an undying love for our people, right? So I am a professor of Black studies. I love being Black. One of my majors when I went to Penn was African American studies. My PhD is in Africology and African American studies. But guess what? I also went to school with people whose parents told them to never study this and never focus on this. Black people telling their children that learning about Black people is a waste of time. Or you could just go to an HBCU and you're fine because you're Black. Well, no, going to an HBCU does not mean you're going to learn about the 250 years that we're talking about, right? And I think to answer your question, Mr. Smoot, is that we need younger people, we need ourselves actually to see ourselves on this continuum of work, right? And so if we're looking to the future, and I'm very much an Afrofuturist, we have to make sure that we're getting to this future with a strong knowledge of the past. And as we are on social media, one of the reasons I just nuked all of my accounts is because I got tired of people saying Harriet Tubman wasn't real The slave ships did not exist,
Wow.
and all of these things. And there are droves of people who believe these things because they have been removing this education from the schools. Not that it was all that great to begin with, but we are discouraging our young people from studying this. We are losing Africana studies departments left and right across the country because our young people are not majoring in it. They're not studying it. We are pushing them so into the money-making thing, which, you know, Beverly, you said earlier, is like we're pushing them into those things, and we are moving them away from the humanity of the humanities. Right. And where are the teachers? Right. We know the studies say that Black boys learn better from Black men, but yet Black men are only 2% of public school educators. So brothers, what are you doing? Brothers are saying that they want therapists, they want Black male therapists, but then you're telling young people, forget college, just go to get a trade. Why do you think you're going to become a therapist if you don't go to school and do these things? And so we have to think as parents, as elders, as the folks who have influence on the younger folks, how are we making sure they know that they are on a continuum of work, of efforts that have been 200 plus 400 years in the making? And I think they don't necessarily see themselves in that way, which is why I pivoted from my social work and community organizing to becoming an educator. I'm going to sit in these classes and stand in front of them and teach them about the powerful things that their ancestors have done to get them to be in this seat. Somebody said that their kid is in my class right now. Their friend's kid is in my class right now. I told my students the other day, you're sitting in this seat because of the people who built the bricks of these buildings, right? And so let's remember what this is about. That's our responsibility. We need to be making sure that we're teaching them these things and that they know where they stand.
Dr. Taylor, you're dropping so many gems. I wish we had 2 hours of continuous discussion.
My bad.
No. This is good. I want to do one last lightning round, Dr. Taylor, and we'll start with you. When America celebrates its 300th anniversary in 2076, what does a truly democratic America look like for Black citizens? And what must we do over the next 50 years to help realize that vision? So quickly, final comments, everyone, starting with you, Dr. Taylor.
Save the planet. I'm not sure we'll exist in 50 years. That's the Black people. Come on, we have to save the planet. That's the most pressing issue to me, climate change.
Amen. Dr. Jones.
Well, I was going to say something else, but I will say it. But in addition to the planet, AI is going to fundamentally change, already fundamentally changing everything. So we got to think about climate change and AI. And as a tech guy, that reigns true. I would say, look, I'll be 100 years at our 300th anniversary, and I want to make it to that number, and then I can go on. But for me, what I think is that the future will not arrive by accident, whatever that is. And I'm hopeful that we build the future we want and build it together. I'm hopeful we build a future where we decide we're going to address climate change and address AI in a way that benefits all. I'm hopeful we'll build a future that decides we'll actually address poverty in a real and substantive way. And I'm hopeful that, to me, it's about actually living up to the ideals that they wrote, even though they didn't believe what they wrote when they wrote it. And so forget what they believed and how they acted, but what they wrote are ideals that I would love for us to work to build towards together.
Amen. Beverly?
As I think about the next 50 years, what this sort of freedom and full participation can look like. One, Dr. Taylor, I'm thinking about how we actually sustain the planet and the communities that we have to live in, right? These are the spaces we have to live. But I also think about how we cultivate a creativity and innovation from birth. And all of these challenges, climate change, technological shifts, these are things that we are going to continue to grapple with. And we need our best and brightest and most creative minds to sort of break this sort of channel that we're on, that you cannot think differently, that you have to go into these tracks, and these tracks have been defined by other people to tell you what it will look like. And I think we forget ourselves sometimes in that we do not need permission to create, to innovate, and to actually think freely. And so I think that next 50 years, what it should look like is Black folks thinking creatively, thinking with a liberated spirit, and solving for community at every nexus. That is what it can and should look like.
Thank you. And certainly last but not least, Dr. Harris.
Well, being last and certainly not least, everyone has pretty much said what I was going to say. But, I think the climate and AI, what's ahead, I think what I hope to see in the next 50 years is a stronger culture of care, that there will be sort of mutual sort of obligations for people to help one another, given sort of how our society is changing. And I think if there is such a stronger ethos, that I think that would be a better society, a better globe across the board. So that's what I hope for.
Thank you. Brother Smooth, I hand it to you.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for your participation today and for sharing your ideas. I'm hoping we were able to put some things out in the world to be actionable and for people to be inspired about, at the very least, something to think about. So thank you again. Thank you for all our panelists. Thank you for those who have chimed in. Before I throw it back to Brother Butler, I do just want to reiterate that the thoughts and opinions expressed during this episode are those of the individual panelists and not indicative of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, its regions, districts, or chapters. And with that, thank you again for being a wonderful panel. And Brother Butler, it's on you.
All right. Once again, on the behalf of the Committee of Public Policy, I want to thank our outstanding panelists for sharing their wisdom and perspectives this evening. Also want to thank Brother Dr. Leonard McKinnis for his leadership of the Committee of Public Policy and his bid for creating America at 250 Fireside Chat Series. I would be remiss if I didn't thank other panelists, actually other members of the committee. Dr. Frederick Ingram, thank you, brother, for your support in this. Brother, and now doctor, make sure that's clear, that man earned his credential. Dr. Riley Jones, who just got his PhD this year, awesome individual, I think is working with Beverly on America 250. And then also Rodney Boyd, a young brother that's contributed greatly to this panel. So I just want to thank all of you tonight for being here. Thank you for all the panelists, and stay tuned for more program we have in the future from Alpha Phi Alpha. So thank you everybody for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Do we go?
Yeah.
There you go. You can leave out.
Oh.
Good.
All right.